Just to review the rules of the block central pawn formations, we're looking at patience, we're looking at pawn breaks, we're looking at good and bad pieces. And as the following game will show, we're also looking at for a keen understanding of where pieces are best placed in these complex positions. Now, you couldn't have a bigger contrast between this next game and the last one, which was a virtuoso performance by Woodhams. I think you will agree. Instead, this game comes from the Rilton Cup played in 2013. And it features a player called Stian Johansson, whose grade's only 2079. And here he is playing white against the inventive grandmaster from Spain, Juan Manuel Belon Lopez, who is quite happy playing all sorts of unusual positions in his games. So let's see the opening of this game, which was a check Benoni with a twist, as Black decided to inject a bit of tension into the position by playing a6. And in fact, this is a very interesting move, because I think Black intends to play a Benko gambit if he's allowed to, avoiding certain key variations where White declines the Benko gambit. For instance, if White plays knight c3 in this position, Black can move right along with b5. And White scarcely has anything better in this position than to take the pawn, in which case we get a Benko gambit accepted, avoiding many of these key lines, as I've said. If White plays a4, as Johansson did in this game, and that's what a lot of players do, they just play this move automatically, as if it didn't matter, then e5. And Black's point is that the move a4 is taking a lot of flexibility out of the way White handles many variations of the check Benoni. So what we get now is a block position where it looks like White has been prematurely forced into playing a4. Now, that might not seem to you to make a great deal of difference, but what it does do is later on to dissuade White from casting on the queen side. And that makes quite a difference. So let's see how this game moves right along. It's very similar to the last one, actually, with White building up with his bishop on d3, Lopez castles, and now knight ge2. Well, this is the first deviation. Woodhams put his knight on f3. He made that look like a very good move. Good points in favour of putting the knight on e2. White leaves the f-pawn ready for action should that become necessary. The knight can manoeuvre to g3 and after that maybe into f5. Also on g3, the knight makes f5 by Black unattractive. Bad points about putting that knight on e2. It makes Black's life easier to get rid of this bishop. For instance, if Black goes knight e8, he could already be thinking about getting rid of his bad bishop by playing bishop g5. So there are good and bad points about knight ge2. I guess it's just a question of taste at this stage. So Belon played knight e8, and now White plays queen c2. So I suppose Black already could have played bishop g5 if he'd wanted to. It's interesting to speculate as to why he might not have done that. Maybe he didn't do it because of takes knight g3, and White is thinking about gaining a little bit of time there with h4. A good way to beat weaker players in open tournament games to keep the tension, and that's what Lopez does. He plays g6. Okay, that keeps all of Black's options open. Knight comes to g3, and again Black delays bishop g5, preferring knight g7. Bishop comes to h6. Again, you'd be thinking about bishop g5 in this position, but Belon keeps the tension there. Knight d7. He's almost giving White enough rope to hang himself. The knight comes across to f6. I spoke about this in the previous game, and now White goes for it with h4. And with Black massing his pieces on the king side, I think this is rather an impulsive move. I think this is the move, actually, which leads, in the end, to White's defeat, because it's too ambitious in this current situation. It leaves a weakness on g4, which Belon immediately exploits, and it doesn't really show the necessary level of care that White needs to display in this position. I mean, Black's not without chances here, because White's queen is, I think, very badly misplaced. And the pawn on a4, you know, a4 and h4, this is an uneasy mix with White. White hasn't really handled his pawns properly here, very flexibly at all. So knight g4, that more or less forces White to take on g7. And now, rather than be actually bad, this bishop has started to become very, very good indeed, because it might be already be thinking about taking that pawn off on h4. So white moves forward, black gives a check. It's sensible when you've got a bishop which the enemy hasn't got, in this case the dark square bishop, that you create action on the dark squares. So after knight c3 we go bishop g5, and now black is starting to get right on top. The opening of the h-file means nothing, as white has no penetration squares there, and black is taking over the whole game. So white went queen e2, black went bishop d7, no danger, you might as well develop, and now this move castles. A miserable move, but you could actually say that this position has led naturally on from 4a4. The moment white played a4, he was going to have problems with his king. So he castled. Black went into reverse gear. We'll see why in a minute. He's making room for his queen to come across to h4 with a mating threat. And now, to his utter consternation, Johansson found that after the rook fd1, knight h2, he'd actually lost his queen. It's true, white resigned. So I think what I'm trying to say is that block central positions are not everybody's cup of tea. They're quite difficult, and they do require subtle understanding of where pieces should go in order to play them correctly. That said, I don't want to dissuade you from playing them, because they can be among the most interesting positions one can get in the opening phase of the game.